The reason most people are on the street is the profound failure of family. If you provide that kind of hope, that kind of sense of purpose, you start to live up to that new standard.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Informed Citizen, where we discuss the biggest problems of our time with the experts and visionaries trying to solve them. This show is for the game changers, the world shapers who believe that to solve big problems, we have to be informed. I'm Philip Lindholm, I'm your host today, and I'm pleased to say this show is sponsored by Terry Wise & Associates, the premier real estate firm in the Northwest who believes that expertise matters. Our expert today is Senator Steve O'Ban, who's worked tirelessly on homelessness, which is what we're going to talk about today. Since graduating from the University of Washington and Seattle University School of Law, Steve O'Ban has made it his life's work to help solve problems in his community. Steve served as a member of the Washington State Senate from 2013 to 2021, where he fought for civil rights and represented small business. He also defended Washington State teachers before the United States Supreme Court. Senator O'Ban now serves as senior counsel to the Pierce County Executive and leads a number of new county initiatives, including establishing a crisis clinic and helping open the Parkland Spanaway Crisis Recovery Center that will assist those struggling with substance abuse, addiction, and mental health crises and homelessness. Senator O'Ban has dedicated himself to helping the unhoused, and he has facilitated some real-world solutions that we'll be discussing today. This is one of the most important crises of our time. Homelessness is on our streets, in our newspapers, and it's going from bad to worse. According to the 2023 Annual Homeless Assessment Report, homelessness in the U.S. went up 12% last year to 653,000 people. Steve, thanks for being here.
Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
How big is this problem?
We see it everywhere. It used to be somewhat limited to the urban areas of Pierce County, certainly in Seattle and some of the other major metropolitan areas on the West Coast. It's now in our suburban parks. It's even in rural areas. It's just about anywhere we go.
Mm-hmm. And is it a problem unique to here? Is it a problem everywhere? Is it the same everywhere?
It's roughly the same everywhere. Now, we have a concentration of and there's different forms or populations of homelessness. I think what we'll be talking about today are what we might call the visible homeless, which another way of thinking of them are the chronic homeless, which we can define later. In terms of this population, I think we're most focused on it is a growing problem for several sort of systemic reasons, but also because I think governments don't have good solutions.
One of the things that just absolutely broke my heart is that I heard that the most common age to be in a shelter is infancy.
So I think in those cases, there's usually, of course, with a parent or parents. And let's just take one of our local shelters. The Tacoma Rescue Mission has a wonderful place for families with infants or minors that they can go and get back on their feet, and they can get other necessary services. So the system has responded, fortunately, to provide those kinds of solutions for children, for their families, and so forth. What we don't have predominantly are the solutions for this chronic homeless population, which are predominantly men, but also women. And they tend to be in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and even in their 50s and beyond.
How did you first come across this problem? The way you're attacking this, it feels personal. This means something to you.
My background was I was a trial lawyer, so that doesn't directly bear on this relationship, but I was in the Senate and had the real privilege of being assigned to chair the Human Services Committee. So I had to go to school on our human services system, such as it is, and what the problems are that government often is asked to solve when it comes to these sorts of issues. And so through that sort of 10-year journey, from a policy perspective, I become pretty conversant on those programs we have at the state level. And then I went to work for our county executive and started to see what we were doing at a more local level. And my assigned areas were behavioral health, mental health, and addiction recovery. And it wasn't much of a step then to start looking at homelessness because, as I said earlier, when we're talking about the visible homeless, we're talking about people with addiction and mental health issues. So it's really been in the last 12 years, that's what I really kind of dedicated my professional life to, care a lot about. One thing that still kind of haunts me is particularly when I was in the Senate, how many parents came to me and said, I've got this son or daughter in their 20s, they're addicted to meth, now fentanyl. And once they turned 18, I had no control over them, and I couldn't even get information on what care they were getting or even their whereabouts. Please, what can we do? And there was very little the system did to try to help those parents find their loved ones.
And it seems like everyone knows about this problem, and it seems like all kinds of solutions have been thrown at the wall. You look at other countries like Japan, Finland, they've virtually eliminated homelessness. Why is it so bad here?
The reason most people are on the street is the profound failure of family in two respects. One is if you interview or talk with them very long, you find out they had a pretty rough life. About 30% of those who are homeless were in our foster care system. And when they aged out, they were not prepared to lead independent lives, and so that's why they end up on the street. So their family failed them. Others, they made some bad choices, sometimes when they were adolescents or a little bit older, and there wasn't a family there to help them, to keep them from slipping through the cracks. We have children. If our son or daughter started using and started having the problems with law enforcement or with keeping a job, I know I would. I'm sure you would too. You would jump in. You would do everything you could to keep your child from getting out on the street. There are families that are just simply have dissolved and are not in a position to help a son or daughter in that plight. In fact, they probably contributed somewhat to that. So that's why I say it's a profound failure of family that is often behind what has led someone to be on the street using drugs, and then the mental illness that almost always accompanies drug use and being on the street. So we have to have solutions that are actually getting at those human-to-human needs. You have to create a connection, a community as much as you can, a trusted relational connection with folks to make them feel better about starting to get their lives back together. So the solutions that we have are so one-dimensional. The predominant philosophy is called housing first. Can't be critical of the desire to get everyone into a safe, stable place to live. We all know that that's crucial. But it pretty much stops there. We don't ask the question beyond, well, what do we need to make sure that person is successful in that housing situation? Are they making those important relationships where you have someone that thinks you're worthwhile, you have a purpose, there's a reason for your existence, and you have a future, and let's help you get help with that mental health issue. That's going to be a long slog, but definitely they need that kind of support. We don't provide that kind of important connection. So we need housing that not only provides a warm, stable place for someone to live, absolutely, but we need a place that also builds back into a person's life the opportunity for that community. The one that we're going to talk about, the one model that has succeeded in providing that community and that housing is called Community First Village in Austin.
So I'm hearing you say it's a profound failure of family. It also sounds like it might be a profound failure of the system. There's a systemic failure here.
Government can at least figure out, how to try to build units. It can provide case management, somebody that sort of helps them navigate the system, the mental health and so forth system. But beyond that, government's never been very good at building community and trying to reconstitute a family-like structure or relationships. That's not what government does. And if it's ever tried to do that, I bet it wasn't very successful.
So housing first almost isn't enough. We're really talking about there has to be a second and a third. There has to be follow-up. There has to be wraparound. And you mentioned Community First Village, and that's important to them, isn't it?
Yes, and it's not to rain completely on the housing first model. It just has its limitations, particularly when we're talking about chronic homelessness. And let's define that term. So when we use the term chronic homelessness, which is a HUD term, Housing and Urban Development Federal Agency, we're talking about folks who've been on the street for a year or more, and have a disability, which could be a physical disability, but mostly it's somebody who has a mental health or addiction-related disability. That's what chronic homelessness is. If you can get someone who meets that definition, who's been on the street for 1, 2, 3, maybe up to 5 years, you might be able to get them into a housing first-like option where they could get housed, kind of get stabilized, and now you can start working with them on vocational training and dealing with their underlying addiction or mental health issues. But the social science shows that if you've been on the street for 5 years or longer, the chances of you being successful in the housing first model are very remote. So that's why we need something that is a much more robust, comprehensive approach, which I think this model in Austin is.
Yeah, tell me more about it. Tell me about the first time you saw it with your own eyes.
Sure.
You're walking the streets.
So in 2015, they opened up, and what they had there was about 50 acres, and they have micro homes, about 200 to 400 square feet, as well as RVs. They started with RVs. Our project won't use RVs. But it was an attempt to get people that they had met through this food truck ministry off the street and into this community. And one of the, I think, profoundly important elements or features of this model is they were able to get folks who would volunteer to live there, like you and I and those that are watching our program today, to commit to live there for 6 months, a year, and help to build that community. Come alongside, get to know these formerly homeless neighbors, befriend them, find out what their issues are, help them get to the doctor, help, cry on their shoulder, just like we would do for our family that was in some sort of profound, challenging situation. And amazingly, they got 20-some people to volunteer, to do this. So the first thing they did was they moved these, they call them missionals. We think of them as intentional neighbors, but they call them missionals. And they got them settled, and then they started bringing on the formerly homeless, chronic folks. And so they emphasized in doing it that way this need to build community. Their vision was about 250 microhomes and some RVs. It has been so stunningly successful. As I said, people who go there stay there, 85% retention rate, that they now have acquired additional property, 160 acres total, to build 2,000 microhomes along the same model. Initially, people opposed them. They tried to buy property for this village within the city limits of Austin, and you had the whole NIMBY problem. You had neighbors who didn't want it in their backyard and opposed them, and they finally kind of got chased out of the city limits of Austin and found a property in Travis County, unincorporated Travis County. And so then that's when they started in 2015. They've had people come back who opposed them and have apologized and said, now we see what you had in mind. Because if you go there, you would not know that you were walking or driving through a neighborhood with formerly homeless people. It's cleaner than my neighborhood. So what they found, shouldn't surprise us too much. What they found is when you get someone off the street, you get them into their own little micro home, and they make them pay rent, and they have to be good neighbors, and they have to obey the law. What happens is those folks start to feel a sense of ownership, a sense of pride in this little home they never thought they would ever be able to occupy after 10, 15 years on the street living in a tent, squalor. And they start to sort of self-police, as it were, the other residents because they've taken pride. And their behavior over time starts to change. And you have people start to, I don't want to use drugs. I don't want that life anymore. I have hope. And that's the key here, is you're providing the conditions for people to actually begin to think for the first time in their lives, I have hope. So they provide micro enterprises, so you have a chance to work to help pay that rent. They have a number of activities. They have community events. They have Bible studies. They have other things to help sort of build that sense of community. Every Saturday, Oh, they've got an extensive organic garden, so every Saturday they're giving away produce to the residents so they make good, healthy meals. I could go on and on about some of those elements, but I think your listeners get a sense that if you provide that kind of hope, that kind of sense of purpose, that there are people that value you and are treating you as though you have some sort of dignity, you start to live up to that new standard that's been set by others for yourself.
I know when I was walking those streets, I was just like you. I was very moved how clean this place was, how safe it felt, and that hope you describe. It almost allowed them to believe in themselves in a new way. And I just think there's nothing more powerful than that. Now, one of the major criticisms of Housing First, of course, or the traditional model, I should say, is you got to get clean and then you get services. So how does Housing First deal with addiction that's coming in? How do we prevent collecting drug users, putting them next to each other, and not having that feed itself?
Well, let me just say, Housing First actually doesn't require sobriety. And maybe that's what I misunderstood.
No, that's what I mean. Yeah. So the traditional model says you have to get clean, then you get services. Housing First says we're going to give you a home so you can get clean.
Right. And that's a similarity with this model. So they're not requiring as a condition of you becoming a resident that you will swear off drugs. Frankly, if that was a condition, it would be empty, because let's just face it, we are dealing with a population, again, that's been on the street 10 plus years. The average age, by the way, is around 55. So you're dealing with folks who have profound addiction issues, and then the mental health issues that go along with that in some ways no one ever recovers from, even if they are fortunate to be sober. So you have to take folks as they find them. But what you find is, even though you're putting all these formerly homeless people with these profound issues in the same environment, as you saw when you walked around, you don't feel unsafe. You don't feel you're in some outdoor Western State hospital. You feel like you're in a normal neighborhood. Just the houses are a little bit smaller, and that's because what they find is that folks want to begin that journey because now they have hope again. Now, you got to be smart. You're not going to concentrate in one little neighborhood of your village those who have the most profound mental health issues. You've got to be smart in sort of scattering that, and you've got to make sure you've got these missionals or these potential neighbors who want to also help. So you've got to be smart in the way you distribute them. But certainly what they found there is that you can create a village where 90% or 85% of the residents have come off the street, and it's a safe, healthy place to live.
Yeah. So tell me about these intentional neighbors. Who are these people? Where do they come from?
Yeah. So I can tell firsthand experience because I actually had a chance to live there. Community First Village has as one of their businesses where they employ residents, B&B. So just like an Airbnb. In fact, they're on Airbnb. You can rent a room and live there. So that's what I did for 2 weeks, and my wife joined me. We wanted to see what it was like, not just during the day, but at night. So every night at about 9:30, 10 o'clock, I'd walk around the whole village, and I would see no crime. I think the one thing I saw, some guy had his boombox on a little too loud, but frankly, my neighbor where I live sometimes has her loudspeaker out there. But what I also got a chance to do was meet some of these intentional neighbors or missionals, the folks that have decided they're going to live there and befriend and be family to these formerly homeless. Just as you can imagine, wonderful people. So I've now have good personal relationships with probably about 8 of them, having lived there for 2 weeks. Some of them are retired couples, but several of them are still working outside their home, where they work nearby. One's a teacher, for example. There are a couple of families so they brought their children there. They're probably the most popular missionals for the residents because they love children. Because if you were on the street for that length of time, either if you had children, they were taken away from you. But so they're just sort of delighted to have children walking around there, and they. So there are folks that have just said we want to be the family. to these folks who need those important relationships.
So we know this works in Austin. I understand you're supporting an initiative to bring it here to Tacoma. Tell me more about that.
We set aside some federal dollars that our county, like every other county in the country, got through COVID. And then we did a competitive process to see if there's a provider who wanted to actually own and operate that facility. The Tacoma Rescue Mission was awarded that contract. They have moved forward. They purchased 90 acres in the Spanaway area. They are now in the process of getting the necessary permits approved. The hearing on that permit is at the end of April. So they're moving forward. And if that permit is approved, which we expect it will, then they can start construction.
What has been the biggest pushback against this model here?
Well, as I mentioned with the Community First in Austin, they tried 4 or 5 times. They found a piece of property, but it was neighbors nearby who opposed them. And I don't know all the ins and outs, but they were successful at chasing then this model out of the city of Austin. So just like for them, probably our biggest challenge are those who live nearby, who number one, don't want a development. I think that they would be opposing this if we were putting in single-family homes for middle-class, upper middle-class folks. But certainly, they also don't want to have, a homeless village near them. Totally get it. I would want a lot of information too, if this was coming into my neighborhood. We have tried to explain what this is and what it isn't. I've just explained to you and your listeners what Austin is like. That's what our village that the mission will operate will be like. So far, though, folks, I think they're driven more by what they fear than what is reality, frankly. If you just don't want to live near a development of formerly homeless, just point you to the actual experience of it in Austin, and we hope that folks will at some point come around and not be opponents, but be supportive, even volunteers.
And zooming out for a second, I'm sure you've heard there might be that consideration that, gosh, it's really hard to find housing in Pierce County. It's expensive. A lot of people are struggling. They're working 2 jobs, maybe dual income households. I'm over here working my butt off, and you're giving homes to the homeless. That doesn't seem fair. I'm doing the things I'm supposed to be doing. Nobody's giving me a house. What do you say to those folks?
It's a very legitimate question. It's certainly not the first time somebody's put that question to me. And I'm a taxpayer, so I want to see my money go in a responsible fashion. Do any of us think the money we're spending on homelessness, whether it's at the state, federal, or local level, is achieving any measurable result? Are we getting any kind of a bang for our homeless buck right now? I don't think so. I think we're all very concerned that the problem is not being successfully or even satisfactorily dealt with. And the reason it's not working is because we don't have the right housing model or solution for this visible homeless, this chronic homeless population we're talking about. This is, in my view, the answer. Just as it was sort of a pilot project in Austin, it proved itself, and now the whole community, civic leaders, neighbors, foundations, businesses have come around Community First Village and now want them to build these 2,000 units. And they want them in the city of Austin, which is very interesting because they were chased out of Austin initially. So what I would say to those folks who have that very legitimate question, we need solutions that work. We are spending an extraordinary amount of money right now on homelessness, and not just in trying to find temporary housing that doesn't work because it ends up being temporary for this population. This is the population is in our emergency rooms. They're clogging up our emergency rooms because they don't have the kind of sort of stable lifestyle and supports to get them to a primary doc with the cheaper version of medical care. They're in our emergency rooms, the most expensive medical care. So we are already paying for this problem through extraordinary amounts of health care that is not the right type for them. Law enforcement, if you talk to the sheriff's office, their homeless contacts have just gone through the roof in the last 5 years. It was maybe a smaller portion. It is now the majority of their contacts. If you get folks off the street and into a stable, accountable village, like we're talking about here, and by the way, the sheriff supports our village for that reason, you'll see law enforcement now have more time, more capacity to do what they're designed to do, and that is to respond to serious incidents of crime. Same with fire and rescue. If you've ever seen that, you've seen medics, fire and rescue. They're called out to deal with some homeless person who's walking the streets deranged, or a fire that's been set in some encampment. You get folks off the street and into a successful housing arrangement. The fire and rescue is going to now be able to respond to the things that they were intended to respond to. There are huge costs we're paying right now because we're not adequately dealing with this issue.
So this housing initiative comes at a time when there's a groundswell for universal basic income. There's a lot of people talking about how housing is a right, healthcare is a right. A basic income would be a right so that I can live my life. Do you see those issues as being the same or different?
I think they're different. I am not a universal income guy. I don't see housing as a right. What I see is that there are certain social problems that only government can show leadership in solving, and homelessness is one of them, and with the right solutions, obviously. And I want to remind our listeners, this is a public-private partnership. This isn't government. The last thing we wanted was for government to build this and run it and operate it. It's not the strength of government. We wanted to bring in a proven partner who deals with this homeless population and has for the last 100+ years, the Tacoma Rescue Mission. And they need to go out and raise actually more than half of the money necessary to build and then operate this. So most of these funds are not coming from taxpayers. They're going to come from the private sector, foundations, individuals with resources that want to be part of a solution like this. And there's a lot of folks out there. I mean, I mentioned Austin. I don't think I mentioned how much they raised for their to scale up their village to accommodate 2,000. They raised $150 million in less than a year from the private sector. So for the most part, they did get one ARPA, American Rescue Plan gift from Travis County, but the vast majority of that 150 came from the private sector. That's what the rescue mission wants to do. So if you want to talk about sort of bang for our public taxpayer buck, what we want to see is lead and use county resources. These are federal, so they're not actually local tax payers, but we all pay to the federal government. We wanted to do something that will get the private sector involved and to really provide the lion's share of the funding, and that's what this is.
And it seems like that's a really important piece, knowing how this can scale, what this will look like in the future, because we have thousands of people on the streets in Pierce County, and this project is under 300 homes. There's a difference there. So is it your hope that we can really scale this to really meet the actual need of the visible homeless?
If we build 300 units, we're not going to solve this visible chronic homeless population problem. But we'll get to about 30%. And if this proves successful, as we believe it will, as it did in Austin, it gives us then the opportunity to prove the model and then scale it up. And frankly, it's not just Pierce County that needs a solution like this. King County does. Snohomish County does. Frankly, Portland does. San Francisco does. I think I know of a group, and I'll be actually talking with them on Monday, I think it is. They're trying to build their own Community First Village in the Silicon Valley area. So there are other groups that want to do in their communities something similar. I think if we build this and it proves to be the success I believe it will be, I think there'll be a lot more interest, like in Austin, to scale it up and actually to build one in King County and other places in the state where they're needed.
If we wanted this to make more of an impact, could we have a different kind of model where instead of moving people in and letting them stay there, could we move them in, get them the resources they need for 2 or 3 years, and then ask them to reintegrate into the community?
So that's I mean, that's my desire, right? But we're talking about a population group that's been on the street for more than 5 years, that frankly has such severe, permanent mental health issues that they are never, unfortunately, they're never going to be able to be independent with job training and be able to afford their own rent. That's what this model is geared toward. Now, I know in Austin that is their focus, but they do have a small percentage of folks who live there and work off site. So that were formerly homeless. So that's great. It's not like I think the mission is going to close their doors to those folks. But we've got to have a solution to get these people off the street where they can live and stay there on a sustainable basis, and still expect something from them. They need to work. They need to pay rent. If someone stops paying rent, they're going to be told after some grace being shown, I'm sure, that you'll need to leave, because it's so important for this model to work that the residents all have skin in the game, all feel like they have an ownership interest and want to make this a dignified and worthy place to live.
So what if they don't want to pay rent? What if they don't want to go in the first place? What do we do with those folks?
What is the most humane thing? If this is your son or daughter on the street, you want government just to say, well, that's what they chose in their drug-induced mentally ill state? No, you want government to say that is not a choice. You will either offer you someplace like this. If you turn it down, we're going to get you into an involuntary detox, which we have in this state. We have 2 involuntary detox facilities, one in Chehalis, one in Spokane, but we don't have the will to use it. And I just think that's not being humane. That's not being compassionate. The compassionate thing is to say you don't have a choice to live on the street and take drugs.
So if you forcibly move someone to move into this community,
it'll have to be a choice. Mm-hmm. You have to voluntarily agree,
because it would create a different kind of community, right?
Right. So that's a really good point. In that, there's sort of a separation where you're getting the folks who want something different than the horrible existence they've had in the street. They're sick and tired of being sick and tired, and now they're choosing something better. Those are the people we're helping, not the people who are looking for a cheap place to flop and do drugs and sell drugs. No interest in that. So what are those people who won't choose a very dignified, healthy, responsible option of our village? That's not a group we're addressing in this, but it does need to be addressed. And personally, I don't think we should give folks that option to live on the streets and do drugs.
We have a lot of real estate investors who listen to this show. What does this say about property values? What does this say about the future of housing in our community?
Well, every person we can get off the street and into an accountable, stable housing development like this is one less person who is driving down property values.
Steve, this is powerful stuff. If someone's listening to this and like, gosh, I really want to support this, I want to find a way in, what can they do?
So the first thing I would say to those folks is thank you for taking an interest. And we do need those to step up and support this and give to it and ultimately volunteer. One of the things that's really cool about the village in Austin and what will be true of this village is most of us, we see a homeless person or encampment, we walk on the other side of the street because we're afraid. We don't know what to do, and we wanted help, but we don't. And there's a guy I buy food for, and Chuck is his name. I just think, I want to move him into this village as soon as we're up and running. But for the most part, we feel like we're kind of powerless. At the Austin Tacoma, Community First Village, they have 250 volunteers per week. So they have this garden I mentioned. There's lots of other volunteer opportunities. So you provide an environment where people can actually do something tangible and meaningful to help those who are the most powerless and ignored in our society. So here's the website link. You can click that. That'll take you to the Tacoma Rescue Mission's Pierce County Village website, and there's more information about how they can help.
Well, thank you. This is such an important message that I want people to hear. It's such a big problem in our community, and I like seeing real-world solutions to it. So if you're sitting at home, plug into that website that Steve mentioned. If you have a real estate problem, please do contact Terry Wise and Associates. They are in the business of solving real estate problems. Thank you for coming, Steve. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll see you again soon.